Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I'm going to be breaking down how I just killed my mid-October Michigan buck and the tactics I use that can help you now and through the rest of the season to tag your own deer.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your guide to the whitetail woods. Presented by First Light, creating proven, versatile hunting apparel for the stand, saddle, or blind. First Light. Go farther, stay longer. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
All right. Welcome back to the Wired to Hunt podcast. We are here with a special emergency, impromptu, unexpected, just you and me show. Because this isn't something I usually do, but when the time is right, when the iron is hot, when things are happening, I want to jump in and give you the latest information, the most recent updates and stories that are fresh off the presses. And this one is very hot because I just killed a buck mid-October. October lull, as they say, was not so slow for me this year. And what I want to do for you here today is to walk you through exactly how I killed this deer, the things I did in the off season, the plan I put together, the conditions that I waited for to make my strike, and the very specific set of circumstances that led to one of the most intense deer hunts of my entire life. This was, I guess without giving too much away right now, this was one of those very rare times when you put a specific hunting plan together, like a very detailed, I'm going to do it here, I'm going to do it at this point, this is what the deer is going to do, this is where I'm going to be, this is how it's all going to work out, and then have it actually work that way. I mean, I oftentimes have plans like that, but 9.9 times out of 10 doesn't work out. Well, this time it worked almost exactly to a T. So I want to share with you exactly how that happened, and then kind of take a step back and try to make this relatable and useful for all of you, and talking through a couple of the takeaways, a couple of the things that I did here and that I think were reinforced for me as lessons that can help you in mid-October and late October, all the way through November. I want to give you some specific ideas that can help you have more success this hunting season, no matter when you're listening. So that is the game plan. That's what we're doing here. And it's just, like I said, going to be pretty casual. I'm going to walk you through this stuff. It is fresh on my mind because this all just happened last night. And I'm excited. I'm feeling very thankful. Maybe haven't had quite enough time to process it, but that's what I'm going to be doing here today. I'm going to be processing live on the air with you guys, and we'll see what comes out of this. So this story is a shorter story in some ways than others you've heard, because this is not a 3 or 4 year hunt. This isn't like the wide 9 hunt that was 4 years of history with one specific deer, which, by the way, if you haven't watched that film yet, it's on the MeatEater YouTube channel. Doing a shameless plug here, but check out the 4 year hunt for the wide 9 at the MeatEater YouTube channel. Really think you guys will enjoy that. It's like a 40-minute film, dives deep into that story, lots of ups and downs. This was not that kind of hunt, because this is a location that I just started hunting this year, and this deer was killed on my very first time hunting this spot. So very different than the wide 9 story. But I will rewind the clock a little bit, because this hunt started this past summer. Some of this stuff I mentioned earlier in the year, kind of prepping you guys, and when we talked through our goals, hopes, and hit list podcast in the summer, I shared some of this, but I'm going to give you the full recap now just in case you didn't hear that. So earlier this year, I lost access to a property that I hunted last year. That property got sold. It was a nice farm, pretty good size. I had kind of depended on that one as a really great kind of plan B type spot to spend some time in. So coming into this summer, I knew I again had to find more access. And so I just kind of came into this year going back, I guess, to my roots. I kind of wanted to get back to what I did 10, 15 years ago, when I just remember, I was, like 20s, mid 20s. And anytime I ran into someone who maybe had some land, I would, bring up deer hunting and just happen to see if there might be an opportunity there. I was knocking on doors. I was asking around. I was talking to family and friends. And I just want to get a little bit more of that happening. So this year, talked to a number of different people, just asking around, seeing if there's anyone who maybe I hadn't known of in the past that had a little bit of land that they might be willing to share access to. And to make a long story short, I did pick up some new spots. Picked up some stuff in Illinois, as we talked about, and then picked up several spots in Michigan as well. And I think the main takeaway here with the access thing is to never turn your nose up on a spot, to never judge a book by its cover, because one of the parcels that I got access to didn't have a whole lot going for it. It was mostly just a big farm field. And I remember when I got permission on this piece, I pulled up the maps and I looked at everything, and some of these spots just fields, not a great chance to kill a mature buck in that kind of spot. So I thought, okay, I'll shoot some does there, help out this farmer, do my, my management duties, but I don't know if this will be a spot I'm going to, get a crack at an older deer. But one of these spots, when I looked at that aerial, you could see that it butted up to a really impressive looking swamp, a good swamp system, a place that I'd kind of driven around in the past, was aware of, had always wanted to get access somewhere around this swamp. And this property butted up to it and had a little bit of cover on the backside of it. Something like 4 acres is what I kind of was able to measure the area of actual cover. This is grass, brushy stuff, some autumn olive, some scrubby willows, that kind of stuff, some buckthorn. So good cover, but a very small amount of it. And then a cornfield for 97% of the property. What it had going for it, again, was it butts up into this great big swamp, which is, in places like Michigan where there's a lot of hunting pressure, it's always going to be different depending on where you're at. But for me, in southern Michigan, the sanctuaries oftentimes are swamps, wet, big, nasty, thick stuff that other hunters typically don't want to go into. That's where deer can get a little bit of age on them in my area. In Wisconsin, it might be big, hilly, nasty topography. In Iowa, maybe it's a big open CRP field. There's no trees around, and so hunters can't hunt traditionally there. Whatever it is, finding those sanctuaries is huge. And so I knew, even though this was a very small huntable area, it was next to a really good looking sanctuary. So I kind of flagged that as, hey, this is still worth a check out, even though it's pretty small. So late in the summer, I went out there, I did a speed scout. I walked the outside edges of the field. I walked that back section of cover. I marked the scrapes that I found, or spots that looked like they would be historically scrapes where you can still kind of see the remnant opening underneath these overhanging branches. I marked the major trails, leaving the swamp, heading into my section and heading into the cornfield. And I did notice a couple things that I really liked. 2 spots in particular stood out. One of them was this little cluster of oaks on this transition between the swamp and the corn. And so in this cluster of oaks, it's maybe an acre, but big, healthy looking white oak trees and one of these awesome scrapes right at the convergence of 2 or 3 different trails. So I marked that. I found a tree that would be downwind of the typical winds. I thought about how I would access it, and I put a camera on this scrape in that spot. Set that up, moved on. Continuing on to a different part of this little 4-acre piece, I found another spot that was very interesting. And here was a ditch that came out of the swamp and stopped right before it got to the cornfield. And I thought to myself, when I looked at that, where that ditch, and it's like a full, a water-filled ditch. And I saw that, and it was pretty wide, and it did not look like something that deer would want to jump over if they didn't have to. I immediately thought, this is a travel pinch. This is a spot where deer are going to funnel around the ditch and be pressed up alongside this cornfield. I then saw a buckthorn tree, bush, shrub, whatever you technically want to call it, that was leaning right out next to that ditch that had a big old opening underneath it where you could just tell for years deer had been making scrapes underneath that. And then as I had approached that, I'd also bumped a buck that was bedded out on these little 2 fingers of timber that extended, not timber, it's more like brushy shrubs and very small scrubby trees. But there's 2 fingers that extended alongside either side of the ditch going in towards that swampy section. And as I walked past that, I bumped what looked like a decent buck off the end of one of those points. So all of that is telling me, all right, there's some bedding here. There's this pinch here. There's the standing corn behind me. There's a obviously well-used annual scrape right here. All of it made my spidey senses tingle big time. So again, I thought, okay, this is an absolute great hunting location. I like what I see here. You could see deer using this in October, coming out to feed from that swamp, heading out into the corn. I thought, also during the rut, there's going to be does coming out and feeding here. This ditch might pinch a little bit of that movement in front of me. Problem was, as I searched around, as I looked around this whole area, there was no trees you could get up into. There was no options whatsoever within shooting range, even really outside of shooting range, unless you got like 60, 70 yards away to get a saddle or a tree stand somewhere. So I just remember standing there this summer thinking, what the heck do you do? How would I make this work? And maybe in the past, I would have just moved on. I would have said, can't hunt it. No trees, can't do it. But I remember thinking, like, this is a spot you have to be. And there's got to be a way to make it work. So I first thought maybe I could hide in the ditch. Like maybe I could get down and stand in the water or stand on the bank and hide underneath those, underneath the weeds and wait for deer to come by. Maybe I could shoot from that position. But then I got to thinking the only way to hunt this area would be with a wind pushing from that ditch out into the field. Otherwise, if you have a wind blowing somewhere else, it's blowing into where all these deer are coming from. It just wouldn't work. So I then thought I could probably hide in the corn. And this was a really key thing for me, was realizing that I can use that standing corn basically as a blind, right? You see a lot of people who own land putting pop-up blinds or hay bale blinds or even tower blinds in or right behind standing corn. Like some people will even, have a cornfield, they'll mow some of it down, and then they'll have their pop-up blind right inside the standing corn. Well, I can't do that, but I could basically use the standing corn like a blind. I could hide in it, just stand in it or crouch down in it. So I walked out there about 25, 30 yards from where I wanted to be able to shoot to, and I started looking around, and fortunately, maybe not for the farmer, but for me as a hunter, a lot of that corn had been eaten by deer. So there was a lot of it knocked down. So it almost was like someone who came in and mowed some of this stuff down because there's pretty good openings. So I found a spot where I was back far enough that I was right on the edge of the standing corn and then had this kind of knocked down corn in front of me. And I just marked a waypoint on Onyx and said, all right, this is the spot that has the most lanes to different places that I think deer might come through. It has me within shooting range of that ditch funnel, and I can see that scrape. So I marked it and said, all right, I'm going to come back at some point, and this is going to be the spot to hunt if I want to hunt the ditch. So that's where I left things. I had a camera on that scrape. I marked the waypoint, finished my little quick scouting walk through there, and peaced out. I was done. That takes me to, I don't know, sometime in August, late August, and pictures started rolling in on those two cameras that I had, and ended up being pretty promising. There was a handful of nice deer, nothing giant, but some bucks that were maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4. And then finally, this crazy big brow tine buck. Just like crazy big brow tines, like eye-popping, 10, 11, I don't know, at the time, maybe 12-inch long brow tines is what it looked like to me when looking at those first velvet photos. So super exciting. I've never had a buck like that anywhere I could hunt. And showed my kids the pictures, and Everett, my oldest, wanted to call him tall brows. So this deer right away stood out. And fortunately, over the rest of the summer, late August into September, that deer showed up somewhat consistently, not over and over and over again, but enough to know he was in the area, he was using this cornfield, and he called this zone home at least. So fast forward, as the season is approaching, I'm continuing to monitor these cameras. I'm monitoring different properties I have to hunt. I do some drives around these various neighborhoods, just trying to see if there's any deer in the fields, just trying to get a sense of what else is out there, and slowly start putting together a good game plan. The approach that I am taking this year is to be a little bit more spread out, to try to keep tabs on what deer are around, to collect information through cameras, through long distance glassing, through the occasional observation stand type hunt, and sometimes doing a quick drive through or walk through and trying to scout a little bit on foot, and hunt the properties that have a potentially active deer. So I'm not going to overhunt any one particular property after one particular deer. I'm a little bit more open to what I'm targeting this year. Last year was very much wide 9. This year, there's a handful of different deer. Some spots here in southern Michigan, some spots up in northern Michigan, and I'm going to go where the iron seems hot and where the conditions seem right. So in this case, there's a few things that had to be lined up for me to want to hunt this particular small property. I knew I would not be able to hunt it a lot because, again, it's small and you could burn it out pretty darn quick. Like there's 1 or 2 spots. There really was nowhere else you could hunt on this piece. And so I was looking to make very targeted strikes. So waiting for the right moment and then give it a shot. And then back out for a while and maybe give it one more shot. But this wasn't a place that I could hunt over and over and over and bump around here and try this spot and try this spot and try that spot. So I was going to wait until I felt pretty darn confident. So that was number 1. Infrequent hunting in this particular location. That doesn't mean I'm not going to hunt other places, but for this spot, it's got to be the right time, the right moment for a deer that I actually want to take a crack at. The one main deer that I want to take a crack at on this property was for sure that tall brow tine buck. There was another 8-pointer who looked like maybe he was 4 with short brow tines that I thought, if that deer hangs out here a lot, I might be interested in that one. But the tall brow buck was there the most, probably maybe of any of the other deer I was seeing across those 2 different camera locations. He was showing up somewhat frequently. Now, in order to hunt him, I mentioned I needed those right conditions. Couple things. I needed some kind of wind that was not blowing into the swamp. I could get away with maybe a straight north or a straight south to parallel it, or I could get something that's blowing like northwest or southwest coming out of the swamp, but I couldn't have anything going into the swamp. So that was a key thing. Secondly, as I started seeing pictures roll in of this deer, I was getting a basic sense of the fact that he spent a decent amount of time in this zone, and he was showing up on the edges of daylight and a few times in daylight. I had morning pictures of him coming into bed before the sun was up, and then I had a couple days where he came out before dark in the evening. So he's bedded somewhere on this side of the swamp. I knew that my cameras were just telling me a slice of the story. So if I got 2 pictures of him around daylight or close to daylight, he was probably coming out more often than not, just different spots that I can't monitor. So what I knew I wanted to do was wait until I had that right set of winds and then a trigger, which for me usually is a cold front of some kind. I want some cooler weather coming in. I want a weather change. Ideally, 10 plus degrees, 15 plus degrees of a temperature drop. That's something I really want to see. If I see that in October, I'm interested in taking a more aggressive swing on one of my spots. So I needed that. Another key thing with this particular spot is that I had to walk through a standing cornfield all the way to get to this location, and then I needed to, sneak in standing corn and set up close to where some of these deer are probably bedded, right? So I remember thinking to myself, like, this is going to be very hard to pull off if it's very dry and very still. I need some wind cover or I need rain cover to be able to move through all this standing corn and get set up in the corn without alerting deer that maybe are bedded right off those little points that wouldn't be that far away. These bucks could have been bedded 60 yards away maybe from where I'd be trying to set up. So as I was watching the forecast, I needed the wind direction. I wanted the cold front. I wanted wind or rain so I could stealthily move in there. And then finally, like I mentioned, I would love it if I had photos that told me, again, give me some confidence that he's still in the zone. And so that's what I ended up getting. All of these things, these stars all aligned here just recently, the evening of October 13th. I had the cold front move through. Temperatures dropped from, I think, the 70s on Friday all the way down to 50s and high 40s by Sunday. I had a west-northwest wind. So this wind was blowing away from the cover and down, allowing me to basically walk with the wind in my face, just kind of quartering across my face and into my face, straight from the road, all the way through the standing corn. And then it had been raining for the last day and a half. So everything was wet, everything was quiet, and there was a little bit of a breeze. So I could sneak in there completely silent, nothing would hear me. I could head in there with the wind blowing across my face and down, so deer might still feel comfortable coming out to this field. If a buck wanted some degree of wind across his face, he could still smell something as he came out to feed, but he certainly wouldn't smell me. This cold weather, I thought, would give me a trigger to get him moving a little bit earlier than usual, and I had 2 pictures of him moving in daylight in the prior 10 days. And then I had some other shots of him coming into bed in that general zone, that 10-day window too, right, around daylight. So again, it's just telling me I'm probably close to his bedroom. And now I have this cold front that I think will get him out here to this food source, likely a little bit earlier in the day than maybe he would on others. I've got one of the best food sources on the edge of this big swamp. So I believe that there's probably a lot of deer that are going to head towards this standing cornfield. There's bean fields in the other area, but those are mostly harvested. There had not been a freshly cut cornfield that sometimes is the kind of thing that gets deer flocking to it. So, there's a good chance these deer were feeding the corn. Saw a lot of deer on cameras doing that. This would be the trigger, I thought, that could make it all happen. So based on all that, the ditch standing corn spot was where it was going to be. Those were the conditions I was waiting for, and that's why it was so ideal. I rushed home from visiting with my family in Western Michigan, got home Sunday afternoon, grabbed my gear, took a scent-free shower, slipped out there, walked straight down the rows of the standing corn right to my pre-marked location on my map, and tried to just hunker down in the corn. And I remember getting situated in there. I brought a little mat to kneel on to keep my knees from getting soaking wet the whole time. I remember really trying to be careful about setting up in the right position, because when you're hunting on the ground, it's harder to move. It's harder to adjust sometimes than when you're in a tree, right? Because you just might not be able to move as much because you're at ground level with deer. You are at the mercy of where the deer show up. So, when you're up in a tree, they're usually not going to see you. Hopefully not at first. So you can move around, you can readjust, you can fix things in the moment. But you kind of need to have everything fixed just right on the ground, or at least I want to try to set it up that way. And I remember last year I had to hunt on the ground, again, without a blind, just hiding in grass last year in Nebraska. It was a similar situation where I knew this is the spot I had to be to intercept a deer, but there was no trees. And so when I got there, just like I did last night, I spent a lot of time thinking through, okay, where exactly do I think these deer might come through? How exactly do I need to be positioned with my body to be able to draw back and shoot? I don't want to have to reposition my body if I don't have to. How do I best take advantage of cover here on the ground so that I can hopefully hide down here, but still have some shooting lanes? So all that stuff was going through my mind last night too. I was using standing corn right behind me, but I didn't want to be deep into the standing corn because I wanted to be able to shoot in front of me and to the side of me. So I got to this spot, as I mentioned, where there was this pushed down corn from the deer feeding already, but there's still some patches of standing corn here and there. So I kind of adjusted my location just a little bit to where things had been, changed since the summer. And what I had was some open pushed down corn to my right, where it was almost like a quarter acre or half acre, almost like food plot looking thing because of the corn being pushed down. So I knew if any deer came from the north of me, I could turn and make an adjustment and take a crack at the deer over there. If he came north of me from a spot I wasn't expecting, I would have options. If he came right out in front of me off one of those 2 little brushy fingers and got pinched by the ditch, I would have a perfect 25-yard shot right in front of me. And then I could see the buckthorn shrub where that big scrape was. Now, I didn't have a perfect shot to it, but I could likely get a shot at him as he approached it. Or maybe if I had to make a slight move, I could get a shot. But I didn't want to get any farther up, any closer to that, which would have given me a more clear shot to there, but would have exposed me even more. And that was like the challenge, was trying to get that balance of being able to stay hidden while also having shot opportunities. So I spent, 10, 15 minutes thinking this through and making tiny adjustments. Like, let's move 1 yard over here. Okay, is this right? No. I'm going to move 2 yards over here. No, I got to take advantage of these 3 corn stalks here. So really was trying to get that just right. got myself situated, tried to map out exactly where the best place to put all my different things would be. Again, it's these little tiny things that many times don't matter, but sometimes they make all the difference. So I try to be very thoughtful about all the possibilities. This is a really key thing that I've talked about a lot. So I'm beating a dead horse maybe, but every time I get set up in a location, I try to walk through every possible scenario and think through, can I draw if a deer comes here? Can I move into position if a deer is over there? What will I do if a deer comes out from behind me? What if I miss and I need to grab another arrow? Where's my quiver positioned? Can I reach the quiver easily? Can I do it quietly without a deer noticing? If I need my grunt tube, where's that going to be? If I need to reposition and shoot up into this open area to the north, what will I do? Do I have anything in my way that's going to keep me from being able to make that move? Is my backpack in a spot that's going to get in my way if I have to move to shoot over by the scrape, etc., etc.? All of those scenarios went through my mind in that first 15 minutes as I sat through and thought through how I wanted to position myself here. I get all that done. I'm on my knees, kind of hunkered down with some scattered standing corn and then broken down corn in front of me, effectively giving me a natural ground blind as best as possible. And as soon as I get kind of settled, I hear a deer sneeze, like that kind of sneeze cough sound that if you've been out there in the woods long enough, you've heard that plenty. You can identify it right away. Like, that's a deer. And it sounded really close. So I'm laying down almost. I've just hunkered down as low as I could because this deer was close. And that was kind of the name of the game of this hunt, is that stuff would just appear very close. There would be no deer, and then there would be a deer 35 yards away. There would be nothing, and then there would be a deer 25 yards away. Again, it is a breeze, and it's rainy, so you can't hear almost anything, or at least very minimal walking sounds. So the hunt begins with a little buck coming out of one of these little brushy fingers, walks alongside that ditch, comes right at me, and walks within 10 yards, 7 yards. And I remember just trying to melt into the ground so he wouldn't see me. And he gets right up on top of me and then gets into the row of corn that I'm in and looks straight down the row. And I'm right in the middle of the row. And he kind of like jolts, notices there's a lump on the ground, and bounds away. He doesn't blow, but he kind of bounds off and then walks away. So I consider myself lucky that he didn't totally freak out, but I knew that's like a chink in my armor. So I then readjusted my location again and again, micro adjustment. I just realized I need to set myself up so if any deer comes into a row, I'm not right in the middle of that row. I need to use the row of corn to break up my outline. So there were some dead corn stalks that were kind of pushed in different places, and I just leaned one of those in along the side of me so it breaks up my outline a little bit more, and then I slid up 12 inches so that the row of corn is on either side of me, or at least on my right side. So instead of my body being right in the middle of a row, I now have like half my body in one row, half my body in the other row, and if a deer were to walk through that, looking down the rows, now they're just seeing a little bit of a clump sticking out from one row of corn and a little clump sticking out the other, but not one big ball. That ends up paying off when, 10 minutes later, another buck comes out, does the same thing, another young deer, and he comes through right at 5 to 10 yards again, very close. And this time he kind of walks through, eyeballs my area, but doesn't freak and just walks past into the main standing corn behind me, disappears feeding. Fast forward another hour-ish, and another deer comes out. This one's a doe. She comes out from the left side of the ditch, and near that scrape, she actually was standing in the scrape, and then she comes walking right towards me and walks again to 5 yards, right into my face. And she's like on top of me, notices me at 5 yards, and same deal. She kind of like boogers, like sees me, gets a little weird, bounds off, stops, turns, stares at me for a while, stares at me, and then couldn't figure it out. Turns around, slowly walks away. At this point, I thought, hey, you're getting away with it. This is good news. You haven't had a deer blow the whole thing up. That's the good news. Bad news is you're playing with fire. Having this many deer come this close to you, it's bound to blow up in your face. I remember I was having this conversation with myself in my head, like, yikes, this might not work out because there's too many deer that are coming right to you. Just seemed like it was a matter of time until something was gonna just start blowing and blowing and blowing, or if a bunch of deer came out and started feeding, and then one of them gets close. If you get a dozen deer all of a sudden running away, that's gonna make a commotion. You can only get away with so much of that before a mature buck is gonna know something's going on. But as I was thinking that, and I remember thinking, like, gosh, I don't know if this is gonna work. I glanced to my left and I saw antlers in that scrape. And I pull up my binoculars and can get a better look through like the brush and the stalks that are there. And I realize it's him. Tall brows is right there. 25, 30 yards in the scrape. There. In shooting range, but behind stuff. I can't get a clear shot. So that's a holy crap kind of moment. It's not even 6 o'clock yet, and he's already out there. It had rained earlier in the day. It actually had been sprinkling a little bit while I was out there. Now it cleared up. Barometric pressure is rising. It's 20 degrees cooler than it was a day and a half ago. Picture perfect conditions as far as I'm concerned. And bam, there he is. But I'm on the ground, hiding in half stalks of corn, 25 to 30 yards away from him. And he's just right there. Like I never heard him coming. I didn't see him coming. I have no ability to move into position, to do anything different. He's just there. So I just remember at this moment thinking to myself, okay, don't panic. Just wait. Wait it out. And so as soon as he kind of turned his head, I waited there for a while. At this point, I could see his eye like kind of right in my direction, so I couldn't move. As soon as he turned his head, I slowly reach over and grab my bow. And I, fortunately, as I described, I had everything positioned in the right kind of spot that I should be able to make something happen without a lot of movement. So I'm able to reach over the bow, grab the bow, slowly pull the bow up. I'm low on my knees because I've been hunkered down because that doe had just passed through not very long ago. So I was like crouched really low. I wasn't like up high on my knees. I was down low on my knees. And I can't shoot from this position. Like where he is, can't see his vitals. All I can see is the top of his head. So as soon as he turns around or turns away his head a little bit, again, I rise up higher onto my knees. So I go from like down on my knees with my butt on the back of my legs to now all the way up my knees. And I can see him better, but I can now see that there's still too much corn and brush in front of his vitals. Now I can see like his chest up to his head and neck. Can't move. I'm there. I have the bow ready. I'm thinking, okay, how do I maneuver into a shot? And then he spins and looks at me. Like his head just kind of turns and just staring like right in my general direction. It wasn't like, oh, I nailed you, but it was something got his attention. And in my head, I'm worried. Did he just nail me? Did he bust me? Now, what follows is a collection of different variations of the same thing happening again and again over the course of 30 minutes. And it's honestly all of a blur in my head. So I can't remember which one of these things happened in which order. But I'll give you the basic gist of what happens over the next 30 minutes. He's 25 to 30 yards away. He's staring at me. I'm holding my bow up, clipped on, but not drawn back. I'm thinking he's seeing me. I freeze in that position for 3 to 5 minutes. He finally relaxes, turns back, looks away. Begins, if I recall right, he begins to work the licking branch in the scrape. As soon as he does that, and I can see that his left eye is not looking at me, I try to make a move to get into another lane where I might be able to get a shot, and then I realize I'm going to have to stand to actually pull this off here. So as soon as he's up in those branches, really well distracted, I stand up and start to move into a position to get a shot. And then he spins his head around and looks right at me again. And then thinking, for sure, I'm busted. Game over. And I just stand there. And I remember thinking, like, don't breathe. Don't look him in the eyes. I think I closed my eyes. I just try to do anything to stay calm, cool, and collected. And that lasted another like 3-4 minutes, just frozen, just waiting. Any second now he's going to bust. And then he puts his head down. And I'm just about to start moving again, trying to take another half step. Again, I'm standing up 25-ish yards, 25 to 30 yards away from what I think's a 4-year-old big old Michigan buck in this scrape. There's just like one row of corn that was not knocked down on the edge there that's blocking him, and then some brush. I just need to kind of move to the side a couple steps to get where I thought I'd be able to see. He puts his head down. I start to move again, and then I hear clack, 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 clack. And then I realize what I couldn't see behind that one row of standing corn and brush is that there was a second buck there with him. So they start to spar. I start to take steps towards him and to the side. I get to a spot where I think I have an opening, but now he's spun and that other buck's in front of me. I can't shoot. I think I'm going to have an opening if he spins around. They release. He looks up, looks right at me. I'm frozen again for 1, 2, 3 minutes. I'm not exactly sure for how long. Frozen there for a while. He stands in that position forever. And we're just waiting, thinking like anytime now he's going to bust. But he doesn't. He turns. That other deer kind of turns back, moves off. Then this buck turns and starts heading back to the ditch. This is when I think, okay, he's going to walk towards the ditch. I'm going to have a shot opportunity. He's behind brush. And I remember 2 times. There was 2 different times in this encounter where I thought, like, you probably could get a shot. One of them was when there was that corn in the way. There was some like corn leaves that were only thing blocking the vitals. And I remember thinking, like, if you could get an arrow through there probably, but I didn't want to do it. Like, I didn't want to push it, didn't want to have something go wrong. But I remember having a moment where I thought that might be a shot, but no. And then the second opportunity was when he starts walking away and the brush was just too tall, but it was barely too tall. It was like, 2 inches above where 2 to 3 inches, 2 inches, something like that, above where I would have wanted to be shooting. So I thought, gosh, if you just aim a couple inches beneath that, through that grass, your arrow could punch right through that just fine. Maybe. But then I said, no, you're not going to take a maybe shot like that. So he's walking now with that. He's about to get to the ditch, and right there, it looks like the brush goes down, and it looks like I can see like his head, then his neck gets more open. I begin to draw. I'm just beginning, and he drops like the ditch, the bank of the ditch lowered sooner than I realized. And so now he gets down low, and I can't see the vitals at all now, but he stops and stares at me. He's right there, pinned on me. And I just remember at this point, again, I'm holding the bow. I'm clipped on. I had been in the process of almost starting to draw. And again, frozen, looking at me. And I remember thinking, and it's such a stupid thing, but I was almost like trying to line up the riser of my bow in front of my face, thinking somehow that the bow in front of my face would somehow hide me. And at this point, I started to kind of shake. You could just tell like the adrenaline of the whole thing. I remember seeing my arrow shaking on the end and this big silver fixed blade broadhead just kind of bouncing. And in my head, I'm like, you need to calm down. You need to just get control of that thing. You don't want this shaking silver thing to be the deal that ends this whole encounter. But I also had another thought at this moment. It was at this moment or somewhere within this final piece. I remember thinking, this is it. Like, you're busted. There's no way this deer is not going to get out of here. Just enjoy it. And that was an interesting thing. I don't think I've ever had a moment when I was in a moment of truth encounter with a deer where I thought to myself, this isn't going to happen, but just enjoy the fact that you're this close to this deer. And I should take note of this because this was not a filmed hunt. This is the first hunt I've had this year that was not filmed for MeatEater. This is just a me hunt. This is just for fun hunt. And something I tried to think about as I drove out there that day and walked in that day was to just try to really like wallow in the experience, like really soak it in. Don't let anything stress you out. Don't worry if, you get boogered, if deer figure you out, if it's If it doesn't work out, that's fine. Just enjoy it. Like, you're out there just soaking in the scenery, enjoying watching deer. Just have fun. I remember thinking that the whole time. And it was happening. It was an intense hunt. Like, even before this buck showed up, all these close encounters with deer, it was just, there wasn't a whole lot of time to sit around and think or to sit around and relax. I was kind of in action from the beginning. But I did remember thinking several times, like, man, this is pretty great. Like, this is why you do this. You're in a beautiful place. You're super excited. That's another thing that I should point out. This is the first hunt of this year where I had like full blown, buck killing day vibes. And if you've hunted deer long enough, you know what I'm talking about here. When you have the conditions, the circumstances, the time of year, the intel, the something that makes you think like when you're going into the woods on that day, like it should happen. It can absolutely happen. Those are my very favorite days to hunt. When it is like a targeted hunt where you really have a really strong intuition and set of reasons that this should work. That's how I felt yesterday. And that just colors everything different. Like, you've got extra nerves. I'm all jittery when I'm getting ready at the house. Texting my hunting buddies like, oh man, first day where I'm really feeling the vibes. I'm really feeling it. And that's a great thing. I love that about the fall. You get a handful of days like that where you're just amped. And this was one of those. So I've got that going on while also trying to just enjoy it for what it is. And the hunt kind of checked all the boxes because it was in the action. And then the buck I'm after shows up. I had this crazy encounter. And now I've tried multiple times to try to get a shot at him. Every time I move, he moves. Every time he moves, I adjust whenever he's not looking. And I just can't line it up quite right. Now he's staring at me. I'm hiding behind my bow riser. My silver broadhead is shaking in the wind or shaking, on the rest. And I'm just thinking, he's going to blow out of here. There's no way that you're not busted. What a cool encounter. And then this stinking buck turns. Instead of running away, walks back to the scrape. He gets back to that scrape, and I'm thinking, geez. Again, as he's doing that, I'm having to be frozen because he's in the open, and his face is like his eye is looking at me, and now I'm like exposed. I'm not hiding behind corn anymore. I'm standing because I had walked, right? I had walked on the edge of that corn to try to get a better shot, but then he'd moved again. So now my window of cover or my wall of cover that I was using to get closer to him and try to find lane through, now that's gone because he walked to the other side. So he's coming across now. I'm feeling even more exposed, so I can't move to get a better shot. Goes back to the scrape. I'm blocked from a shot again. Now that second buck comes back out. He kind of circled behind this tall brow tine buck. He's walking towards me. For the 9th time, I'm thinking this whole thing's not going to fall apart. But that buck doesn't see me. He moves off to the side. To make a long story short, the tall brow buck stands underneath the scrape. I make another step to get this last bit of brush out of the way, about to draw. He turns, walks back to the ditch, and this is my window. Like, I now know, okay, if he crosses here, if he gets to the ditch, I have one window, which is just before he starts dropping down that bank. There was a little bit of an opening right before he dropped. As he starts approaching that, he is angled just enough that I don't think he can see me draw. I draw back. He gets right there. I stop him. Shoot. He's perfectly broadside. I am standing on the edge of the cornfield, 25 yards away from him, ish, something like that. And I hit him back. In my mind's eye, it looked like I hit him back of the ribs, mid-body-ish, perfect up and down, but back. And on the shot, I remember two things. I remember, it was a situation where he walked right to the edge of where I'd be able to shoot him. If he took another step, he dropped down the ditch, and then it's just thick brush. I'd never get another shot. So the whole thing was crazy and fast-paced at that point. And I just remember two things. I remember avoiding the shoulder. And I had this situation last year where I hit the wide 9 in the shoulder, and I've been thinking to myself about trying to get back off the shoulder more than I used to. And it's funny, I am constantly trying to get better at this. I'm constantly working to find ways to improve my shooting, to improve my shot opportunities, to remove error. And you think you got it figured out, and then something happens, and the next year you're thinking, well, how do I account for that error? And then you go out there the next year, and then you have some other thing go wrong or something go right. And you're like, okay, I've got it. And then the next year something goes wrong. Oh, well, how do I deal with that challenge? Or how do I fix that thing? And so, as many of you know, if you've been listening for a while, you know that after last year, I wanted to switch stuff up again, went to a quieter bow. I've reduced my max range from 40 yards to 30 yards because I don't want to have bad shots happen. I don't want to wound deer. I don't want to miss deer. I'd rather have fewer opportunities, but fewer shots go bad. Switch to a single pin sight to reduce any possible sight picture issues. Switch to a fixed blade broadhead so that if I do clip the shoulder again, I've got a better chance of punching through. So I made all these adjustments in part because of this bad shoulder situation I had last year, which really hit me hard. And then, of course, I overcompensate. I am paranoid about the shoulder. I remember thinking off the shoulder. And I think what I did is I went off the shoulder, and I think I just pulled when I was moving back off that shoulder, or I rushed it, or just made a human error. And that happens. And maybe he took a step forward. I'm not sure. I don't have film of it. I can't look to see exactly what the deer did. But no excuses. It was not a perfect shot. The shot was back, and he bounded off, ran maybe 50 yards, stopped behind some bushes. I pulled up my binos, found him there, and then he took a handful of steps, disappeared in the brush. Just before he got into the brush, I remember thinking, kind of a wobbly walk, but it was a walk, And when you hit a deer and you think the shot was back, and then you see him bound off, stop, and then walk away, that is a telltale sign that you hit that deer farther back than you wanted, liver or stomach or intestines or something like that. So I went from this 30-minute, incredibly intense, like one of the most intense face-offs I've ever had with a deer, very exciting situation. I get the one deer I'm in there after. Like I had the targeted strike go exactly the way I wanted it to. And then, you have that super, super high, and then you see that arrow hit and it's not quite right. And then immediately you come back down to earth and kind of crash down beneath earth. And, we've all been there. I've been there my share of times over the years. I've had lots of great ones. I've had lots of less than great ones. And this was one of those where I thought, well, that's going to be a dead deer, but it's not necessarily going to happen right away. And so the smart thing to do, the thing you have to do, but is not fun to do, is you got to give that deer time. So I waited there for a while and just watched this little pocket of cover with my binos for a while, just in case he walked out of there and I could see where it went. But he didn't. And then I had one more doe come out, and she saw me because I was still just standing out there in the open now watching. And she saw me, and she did start to blow. And I remember thinking, all right, I probably just need to get out of here before a lot of deer come out, because one deer blowing is a thing. But if I have a dozen deer that eventually come out here at some point, and all these deer are alarming, and I just didn't want to spook that buck any more than necessary. So grab my stuff, slip straight out the cornfield. I don't go to look for my arrow. I don't check out the shot site. None of that stuff, because I just knew the hit was back of where I wanted to be. This deer needs to go overnight. The calculus here is that a deer that is hit somewhere back there, whether it's liver or stomach or intestine, whatever it is, that deer usually needs 8 to 12 hours to be safe. And the problem is that if you leave that deer alone, what they're probably going to do is get to the first good cover, lay down. They don't feel well, they lay down. If they're not pushed, they'll stay there, and they will die in their bed, and you'll find them relatively close. If you push them there too soon, what typically happens is that deer still has enough energy to get out of their first bed and then run off. And they might cover a lot of distance. And oftentimes a deer that's hit back a little bit will not bleed very well. So you're not going to have much of a blood trail. Yada, yada, yada. Long story short, I'm going to make sure that I have a chance of finding that deer and not push it and let him go overnight, even though that's super stressful. And to make a very long story short, overnight, stress about it, worry about it, think through all the scenarios, think through everything as you do. And I'm very fortunate that the next morning, a friend and I were able to go out there and maybe, I don't know, between 70 and 100 yards away, found that buck. And the tall brow buck story is concluded. It was a crazy hunt. I mean, as I just described to you, it was, even though it was a short hunt, it was one hunt. Literally, I scouted this property one day and I hunted it one day and I was able to kill the deer. It doesn't go that way very often. It was like a very targeted strike plan and it actually panned out that way. So I count myself very fortunate that this time the careful plan actually, the deer actually worked, followed the script this time. So that doesn't happen all that often. So I've wanted to try to think through, okay, what worked right here? What did I do right? And anytime you kill a deer, there's a certain element of luck. So that's got to be admitted. Like anytime the deer do the thing you need them to do, count yourself lucky and just appreciate that. So that's number one. But number two, let's talk through like the key things that led to this actually panning out. A big thing was access. A big thing was that I constantly am trying to find new spots to hunt. And this year, after losing a good spot, tried to make an extra effort to do so and picked up 2-3 new spots in southern Michigan. And that ended up leading to a great deer down here. That wouldn't have happened if I had not made the extra effort to just ask around, talk to more people about this stuff. And I think an important thing with this particular property is to remember that you can't judge a book by its cover. Like we all want the 200-acre farm with mixed ag and timber and swamps and topography and the whole 9 yards. That'd be great. But for most of us, that's just not going to happen. I mean, almost all the stuff I hunt in Michigan is less than 100 acres and mostly fields, and none of it is ideal. Like almost none of the properties that I have permission to hunt would be spots I'd pick as like, oh, that's a slam dunk spot. It's usually, well, this little zone looks like it's got promise and this property maybe butts up into something good. And this spot doesn't have a lot going for it, but maybe it will slide under the radar. You got to take what you can get and, don't judge it before you go out there and see what's going on. And in this case, mostly just a huge field, just a little area in the back where there was grass, brush, some scrubby trees, but it made this really great little transition zone along the edge of that swamp. And I'm just very glad that, two things happened. Number one, I looked at the aerial of this property and I thought, that's not allowed to hunt, but it butts up into a great piece. And then number two, when I went out there, just saw what a tremendous transition that this was. So that was number one. Taking advantage of a small property, or at least a small part of a property that some people maybe would say, not worth hunting. There's like one good tree to hunt, but I recognize an opportunity there. Number two, being creative with setups. As I mentioned earlier, 15 years ago, I think I would have walked past this spot and maybe if I identified it as a good area, as a good ambush location with this ditch coming out and the 2 fingers of brush going into the swamp, maybe I would have seen, oh, hey, this looks like a great transition. Oh, hey, this looks like there might be bucks bedded off of those points, maybe in the swamp. And oh, hey, this ditch, I wonder, maybe that ditch would funnel deer movement up through along the edge of the field. Maybe I would have picked out all of those things that made this look good. I hopefully would have identified that scrape, that overhanging branch where there'd be a scrape in the fall. But I think 15 or 20 years ago, I might have looked at this and then looked for trees and not found a good tree for a tree stand or not found a tree for a saddle and then said, well, can't do it. Or I would have looked for the next closest tree and I would have ended up 70 or 80 yards away in a good tree, but not in the spot. But what I've learned is that you don't need to have the perfect tree. You don't need to have a tree at all. You don't need a perfect blind. You don't need to have some big, fancy, elaborate spot. If this is the spot where you have the X, like the X, the spot in the spot, you got to do whatever it takes to be there. Because with a bow, we're talking 2 feet can be the difference. 5 yards can be the difference. One little gap in the brush can be all the difference you need. And so just having the confidence to get creative with where you hunt and be willing to hunt on the ground or be willing to hunt low in a scrubby tree or be willing to hunt really high in a beanpole tree, or just don't get hung up on the ideal. You hear all these different people on these podcasts, my podcast included, who say, well, you want to have a great tree with cover all over, and you want to be 20 feet up and lots of branches around you, etc. And sure, that'd be great, but sometimes that's not going to be in the right spot. And I've just seen now time and time again, so many times in the last decade or so, where if I hadn't gotten creative and been willing to just risk it, willing to be on the ground and hide in grass or hide in brush or belly crawl across the field, I would have never killed deer. I killed a deer on the ground without a blind in Nebraska a few years ago, like 10 years ago. I did it again last year, hiding in the grass, snuck into a spot where there was no trees, ambushed him as if I was hunting from a tree, but instead in a patch of grass. Had a belly crawl on the Y9 last year, had a belly crawl across the field and sneak up to a buck I called Junior a few years before that. It just keeps on reinforcing the notion to me that you have to learn when to go for it. And when, sometimes it's when you see a buck do something and you see it with your own eyes and you think to yourself, well, there's a reason he did that. That's the spot I need to be. Well, you need to do whatever it's going to take to be able to hide your tail there and hunt that spot. If it means laying on your belly, if it means hiding in a ditch, if it means hiding in a bush or being 3 feet up in a tree, whatever you got to do, you got to be there. So sometimes it's when you see a deer do a thing. Sometimes you just know based on sign, that's the spot. Sometimes you actually see a deer bedded and you got to go for it. When you have an opportunity lined up like this, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? We only have so many chances. We only get so many hunts. And for too many years, 15, 20 years ago, I was so conservative. I was so worried about scaring deer. I thought, man, if I screw up once, that mature buck's going to catch on to me and I'll never have another chance. But it's just not true most of the time. Even in heavily pressured areas, I talked about this a week or two ago with Jake over at Exodus. These bucks that get to 4 or 5 years old, they're in an area for a reason. They made it to that age because they believe this spot that they live is safe. So if you take a swing and do one of these aggressive things to be in the right spot at the right moment because everything's telling you to do that, even if you mess it up, you're probably going to have another chance somewhere, maybe, but you would never have had that chance if you didn't go for it. So there's a big difference between being a deer watcher and a deer killer. And if you want to get to the point where you're actually closing the deal on some of these deer, you just have to take the big swing. You have to do the creative sit. You have to take the belly crawl or the hide in the corn or the hide in the grass or sneak up on the deer that you saw bedded, even though it's high risk, even though probably 7 times out of 10 it's not going to go well. 3 times out of 10, maybe it does. And it's worth it. So many of the deer that I've killed in recent years have been because I was willing to say, damn it, I'm going to give it a try. Probably not going to go well, but it might. It's definitely not going to go well if I sit back here 70 yards away and just watch the whole time. If you go for it, yeah, maybe you screwed up. But if you do screw it up, you learn something because you were actively trying to change the situation. You were actively trying something new. And then maybe not. Maybe you do actually pull it off and you get to enjoy that situation. So that was a huge takeaway from this hunt for me. Being creative with my setup, being willing to plan ahead and say, hey, there's not a tree here. How can I make up for that? How can I make this work still? Thinking about the standing corn, finding a place I can hide in the corn that gave me some lanes. And then finally, when I got in there and the buck shows up, well, I don't have a shot. And looking back at old Mark, I think I would have been afraid to move at one point as a hunter. I would have thought, okay, I'm hidden here in the corn. I need to just wait until he walks my way, hopefully, and then I'll get a shot at him. And instead, I knew, hey, you can get away with movement even when you're close to deer if you time it at the right moments. And so I waited till he was looking the other way, or he put his head down, or he put his head up in the scrape, or he sparred with that deer, or he moved and walked behind bushes. But every time he gave me a 1 second window, I was standing up. I was taking a step to the left. At one point, took like 3 or 4 steps with my bow about to be drawn, like very aggressive, right in his wheelhouse movements. And yes, I was lucky that there was some wind and there had been rain earlier in the day, so I could do that without him hearing me. But if I hadn't done that, I don't think I ever would have been able to get the shot that I did. So I think that goes back to knowing that, when you have these windows, when things are lined up, you do have to get aggressive, be creative, make your own stars. Like, don't just wait for the stars to align, make them align. That's a big thing. That's a really key thing. Make the stars align for you. Don't wait for some happenstance. Make it happen. Finally, I think an important thing here on this front was that it's October 13th. There's a lot of people who say you shouldn't be able to kill deer or mature deer in mid-October. It's the October lull. A lot of folks who say don't go out there and mess your spots up when there's no chance of good things happening. But truth of the matter is, and we've talked about this a lot too, but truth of the matter is that buck activity, deer activity ramps up throughout the month of October towards the rut. They just shift, right? So what they're doing in September and early October changes as hunting pressure ramps up. Deer adjust to hunting pressure. Deer adjust to changing food sources, right? You've got crops coming out. They adjust to cover changing. You've got leaves falling down. They are making all these changes. There's changes in their habitat. There's changes to pressure. There's changes in their physiology as they're getting ready to rut. So all of that just means that deer are changing. So hunters need to change with them. And if you can do that, you can get on deer. I think if you plan your hunts to account for that, or if you've got a deer dialed in, or if you have an unpressured spot, you can absolutely still have success, especially when you have these right conditions lined up. And so a big thing for me over recent years has been, if I see that front come through that gives a deer a little bit extra incentive to get on his feet earlier, I'm going to take a swing, whether it's October 8th or October 13th or October 19th or 22nd. That window can still be really good. So in this case, our front came through like the 13th through the 15th. And when I saw the forecast, I said, all right, that's going to be one of these swings. Now, I'll also say that it's great to have a lot of different options so that you don't only have one farm or one spot you're hunting over and over, right? So because I had picked up new access, because I had additional properties that I've slowly accumulated over the years, I could hunt early October and then wait and hunt a different spot mid-October. And then I can come back and hunt a different spot a little bit later October, and I'm not burning out any one of those spots. So it's not like the October lull is going to screw things up for me come the rut, because I haven't been hammering one spot the whole month of October. I've been spreading it out, take a strike there, take a strike there, take a strike there. When the rut arrives, no one of them is overpressured. No one of them is ruined, but I've still been able to hunt and I've still been able to have opportunities all throughout the month. So that's an important thing to remember. If you're listening to this on October 17th, don't be afraid to get after it. Take advantage if you have a chance, but then also don't blindly hunt over and over and over if you have just one spot to do it. Go hunt some public land. Go hunt that new permission that you got that maybe doesn't look that good, but who knows? And I think if you can do those things, you've got a better chance of just enjoying your hunting season, because that's so important to be careful to avoid. We talk a lot. You listen to a lot of really good hunters who oftentimes talk about needing to time your hunts. Wait for the right moment to strike. Don't overhunt. Don't hammer these spots too much. You can kill them from the couch, some people say, right? Because if you're educating deer, you're not going to be able to kill them. And all of this is true to a degree. And a lot of what I've talked about with this deer, this particular hunt, would point to me waiting and waiting and waiting. This is the first time I hunted this property. But make sure you still enjoy your season. Have other places. Get out there. Enjoy yourself. So if you have a weekend in October, get out there. If you've got your vacation in November, but then a warm front rolls through and the conditions don't look good, don't worry about it. Hunt. Have fun. Maybe it's not perfect, but you never know. These are wild animals. These are wild places. The whole reason this is so exciting is that it's unsure. We do not know what's going to happen. There are no guarantees. And that uncertainty and the mystery that comes along with every single time we head into the woods, That is a beautiful thing. That's what keeps me coming back time and time again. And I'm betting that's the case with you too. So that is my hunt. That's how I killed this buck here in mid-October in southern Michigan. I'm very thankful for it. It was a lot of fun. It was a very intense hunt. It was a crazy 30 minutes. I actually had that camera send pictures today of almost that entire encounter. So that buck showed up. The time between when he first showed up and when I got a shot at him was about 30 minutes. And I can tell you that, not because I remember it happening in real time, but because the pictures. I've got the first picture there. I've got pictures of him fighting with this other buck. And then I have pictures of him running away, which is pretty cool to see. So yeah, just a really special one that is different, but incredibly memorable all the same. And once again, learning new lessons, having some things hammered home again, and just thankful it worked out. So that is it for me here today. I'm hoping that you will take this and maybe this will inspire you a little bit. Maybe this will give you some new ideas. Maybe this will give you that extra kick in the butt to get out in the woods, even if conditions aren't quite right or whatever it might be. If you're listening in mid-October or late October, there are really good things available to you right now. I should point out, scrapes are going to be ramping up over the coming week to 10 days. So if you are listening October 17th through like the 31st, and if you've got scrapes back in cover that you know deer have historically hit, that is absolutely a place where there will be bucks in the coming days. This buck came to a scrape, and that was one of the, not the only reason. I typically don't hunt spots just because of a scrape. But if you can have a scrape with a terrain or cover feature, with a food source to bed type pattern or whatever it is, having that extra sweetener can be a key thing, especially this time of year. More than any other time of the year. This next 7 to 10 days is your best time for deer to be on those scrapes. So watch out for that. Again, as we get into the last week of October, this is a great window because you have bucks that their testosterone is just about maxed out, but most does aren't in heat yet. So you've got bucks that are ready to go, but can't find any ladies that are. So they're amped up, they're frustrated, they're moving more in daylight right now, but they're still sticking to their home range. So if you have been studying a specific deer, if you've got a pattern on a couple deer, this might be your best window coming up because they'll still be in your area. They're not running crazy yet. They're not randomly, cruising the landscape or chasing does across the landscape. They're still going to be, to a degree, following those patterns you've been learning about this past month or 6 weeks, but you've got a good chance of it happening in daylight. So I put a high priority on that last week of October. And then once November hits, then we're rolling into the rut, assuming you don't live in the South where there's some of these different rut windows. But if you're in the northern half of the country, once November 1st hits, for me at least, I'm thinking bedding areas and funnels and pinch points, anything that concentrates deer travel. There's going to be a lot of bucks moving on their feet, going from doe bedding area to doe bedding area to doe food source to doe food source, trying to find a doe ready to breed. You want to be anywhere that's downwind of one of those doe hotspots where movement's funneled, where movement is pinched down to locations. Find those kinds of spots, put in the time, grind it out, yes, but also enjoy yourself. Do what you need to do to make sure this is fun. This should not feel like a grind, a job, misery entirely. Some of this stuff, it takes hard work, no doubt about it. But if you are not enjoying yourself along the way, you're getting it wrong. You're missing out. There's got to be a balance. There's got to be a sweet spot there between really giving it your all, but then also making sure that you're enjoying this incredible experience for what it's worth. So you probably heard me talk all about this. I won't belabor it anymore. I'll leave you with that. I'm wishing you guys all the absolute best. From here on out, we're going to have some really great interviews coming up, giving you some very, clear and actionable tips and tactics to make sure that the next 4 weeks of your hunting season are as jam-packed and successful as they possibly can. I appreciate you tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this story, and until next time, good luck out there and stay wired to hunt.